By popular request, we're going to do the history of Topps Tiffany cards. And actually, this could be a really short video because officially there was never any such thing as Topps Tiffany. But you'll be surprised by the twists and turns of the cards that eventually came to be known as Topps Tiffany. In 1984, Topps launched what they called the Limited Collector's Edition cards. These are only available in complete sets, and they were sold in cases direct to the hobby. So you couldn't buy them in retail. The cases were only available by distributors and dealers like at your local card shops. And these cards had the exact same design as the 1984 Topps base cards. And in fact, whenever you see one for sale, you'll know that somewhere there's an incomplete set because these were only sold in complete sets. So if you find an individual Ryan Sandberg card, somewhere out there is a Topps Tiffany set that is no longer complete. Some of the most popular cards from the 1984 ones obviously is the Ryan Sandberg rookie. We've got Darryl Strawberry, and then I think one of the more iconic cards of the 80s as well as the Tiffany era is this 1984 Tiffany Don Mattingly card, and a PSA 10 is worth over $6,000. So the designs look the same, but the card quality and the high gloss finish gave them a more luxurious and valuable version of the Topps cards compared to base. And the hobby went on to nickname these the Tiffany's of Topps baseball cards, which is where the Topps Tiffany idea came from. And you'll even see that PSA in their graded cards uses Topps Tiffany to delineate the Topps limited collector's edition cards from the base cards. There are three major differences between the base cards and Topps Tiffany. Number one is this premium white card stock. You'll actually see on the Mattingly cards here, the design is identical, but how they're printed on these premium cards, it really highlights kind of how poor quality the base Topps cards were, especially at the time, and that this premium white cardstock makes everything kind of pop. And then the printing, and if you zoom in, the printing is actually much clearer on the backs of these cards. The next major difference is the premium gloss on the front of the card, which is actually kind of hard to tell just by looking at the card. If you have two cards in your hands, you can feel a thickness difference between the base and the premium Tiffany cards. But one of the ways that I've found to tell if you have them side by side is on the left is the Tiffany's and on the right is the base card. The gloss tends to make certain colors, like Wade Boggs' face here, a little darker and richer because of the gloss compared to what we see on the base card, and I'll show you some other examples of that coming up. The other major difference is the limited production. So I think Topps was kind of ahead of the time here, thinking about entering the junk wax era, that they decided that it was important to create some scarcity and rareness in cards again. And so they only initially planned to produce 10,000 Tiffany sets in 1984. They only produced 7,000, probably based on limited demand in the initial year. And they also have a Topps Tiffany traded set. So this is the limited edition collector's traded series set. You'll also notice on the bottom of them, they say that it's made in Ireland, and that's actually where the cards for all the Tiffany cards were made. So the premium cardstock and the printing process, instead of being produced in the United States, which is what the base cards were at the time, all of the Tiffany cards were produced in Ireland. And that leads us to, how do you tell the difference? Well, from the front, it's actually very difficult. And it's hard to tell if you don't have them in your hand. But the back is where you can really tell the difference between a base card and a Tiffany card. I want to highlight that for you here. So in 1984, the main difference on the back is that the base cards will say printed in the USA, whereas the Topps Tiffany cards, in addition to being a more white, vibrant back color, they don't say printed in the United States because they're printed in Ireland. So this is a very clear way to differentiate the 1984 Topps base cards from Tiffany, and I'll explain why this will be important in a little bit here. So as I mentioned, from the front, it's hard to tell. Even this Don Mattingly, if you look on the right-hand side of the Tiffany, you can see that the yellow box around his face and even his facial features do get a little bit darker. But if you had these side by side and you had to decide if you were paying a premium for a Tiffany card or not, the front is really hard to tell. It's the back where you can really differentiate all this. So those are the three major differences, including, as I mentioned, that the Tiffany cards are produced in Ireland. But it gets a little more difficult from there, because now that we might think we know how to differentiate base from Tiffany, recall that the traded cards at that time had this pinkish salmon look to the back of the cards, which wasn't quite like Tiffany, but it was enough to confuse people that are they maybe Tiffany. Now the traded cards had this a little bit brighter, more vibrant look to them, not quite to Tiffany, but they did not have that glossy coating to them. And so if you could hold the cards in your hand, you could probably tell a thickness difference and you can see a gloss. But just to note that the Tiffany and the traded cards are both brighter in color than the base, which kind of makes it a little bit confusing for folks. And then, of course, when the traded Tiffany cards came out, those are the brighter version of the traded cards, and it's hard to even tell. So I want to take you through kind of differentiating them. The hardest part in 1984 is that the backs of the traded and the traded Tiffany have no printing differences. You can see neither of them say printed in USA on the bottom corner there. And so there's no text or design differences on the back to tell. You have to really look at the fact that even the salmon color of the traded becomes this white, pure white in the Tiffany. So these are harder to tell. And so here you can see the difference between base and Tiffany, traded and traded Tiffany. And it's important to really know because the price or the value difference between these cards can be pretty dramatic. So a base Don Mattingly and a PSA 9 will get you about $90, while a Tiffany version is about $650. And the same here looking at the Pete Rose traded for $90 in base, it's $850 in the Tiffany traded. So it is important to have third parties like PSA, Beckett, or SGC kind of officially grade cards and determine whether it's Tiffany or not. But if you're just looking at them, you're really going to want to know in an ungraded card whether it's Tiffany or not, because the value will change dramatically. The other thing from doing this analysis that I noticed is in 1984, the total PSA population of all Don Mattingly cards graded, there's 24 times less cards in Tiffany, so it's 24 times more rare, but it's only 7 times more expensive. And so I do think there's still some value in the rarity of these Tiffany cards. Just doing this analysis, even 24 times more rare PSA 9s, PSA 10s, it just seems like I might have expected to pay a little bit more of a premium than actually the market is demanding. So why did Topps make the collector's edition? Well, it's important to remember that in 1981, Fleer won a big lawsuit versus Topps to end Topps's monopoly for over a quarter century, where they were the only baseball card manufacturer that had the rights from Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association. And so with this additional competition, and Topps really had to start innovating in order to compete. So I actually really like that when there's competition in the baseball card market, and so Topps had to respond to that. And I'd say Topps's response was actually early because they were creating this limited premium product in advance of the junk wax era. So Topps made a strategic decision in 1984 to launch the collector's edition, in part because baseball cards has moved from a hobby for kids to adults and serious collectors, and they really wanted to appeal to the adults and the serious collectors out there by creating this premium version that's limited, and it cost more than a typical base set at the time. And so they were really going after the serious collectors. They also wanted to address some quality issues. As you notice, the backs of the top cards really highlight that Topps really didn't improve the quality of their cards for quite some time, especially through the 25 years that they were essentially a monopoly. And when Fleer and Donruss came out, Topps had to really up their game a little bit and make better quality cards to compete. And then, surprisingly, ahead of their time, maybe they saw the trend coming, but with the increasing interest in baseball cards and the increasing competition, creating more rare versions created a nice scarcity to what would become part of the junk wax era, and Topps was forced to actually innovate in their baseball cards and technology for the first time in a long time. Which brings us to the 1985 Topps Collector's Edition. You can see in 84, Topps had targeted 10,000 sets of each, and they only ended up producing 7,000 of each. And so in 85, they only produced 5,000 of each. So it's kind of a rough or rocky start to the start of the Topps Tiffany cards here. Some of the most popular and most valuable cards of this time is the 1985 Topps Tiffany Oral Hershiser card, worth $500 in PSA 10. The 85 Topps Tiffany Mark McGwire 84 USA Baseball Team card, which was really a great way for Topps to get ahead of the game in rookie cards by getting the rights to produce the USA Olympic cards. So they got an earlier scoop and an earlier jump on Mark McGwire's card. So the Tiffany PSA 10 is worth $17,000 today. And then the 85 Topps Tiffany Roger Clemens is worth $11,000 today in a PSA 10. Now this is sort of the rainbow looks like for the backs of these cards, from base to Tiffany to traded and traded Tiffany, and I'll walk you through the differences. And this is actually the golden era of Tiffany differentiation. So Topps did a really good job that you'll see the printed in USA is still there on the bottom between space that you don't see on Tiffany, so that's a clear example. And then Topps added a letter and the star before the copyright. And this letter could be A, B, C, D, E, F before, and a star before the copyright, which Tiffany does not have. And then in the traded cards, we'll look at the difference between traded and traded Tiffany here. Topps did a really good job where they learned from their 84, I would say maybe mistake, and that there was no printing or design difference. And so they added these 2 dots to the base traded cards that do not appear on the Tiffany. And often this is sort of the way most people think they can differentiate Tiffany cards from base cards. It won't be true across the whole era of Tiffany cards, and so I'll walk you through that here. But this is a really, really great way to be sure that you're holding a Tiffany card. 1986, Topps has again sold the complete sets of the collector's edition cards. You'll see that they do come in a premium box with a different design by year. They're each individually serial numbered. It's pretty nice. They only were sold in complete sets. But again, they only made 5,000 of these. And so some of the most popular cards here is the 1986 Topps traded Barry Bonds. The PSA 10 is worth over $6,000 today. The 86 Topps traded Bo Jackson Tiffany is worth $11,000. And then the Topps traded Will Clark Tiffany for $370 in PSA 10 condition. The backs of these cards are really challenging because there isn't as clear a difference in color, but just based on the way that this kind of red back design came to life, but I'll show you some of the key differences. Again, between base and Tiffany, you can see the clear white premium cardstock popping, which is really one of the best indicators. And then again, the printed in USA on the base, where Tiffany does not have that. And then the letter and the star, so in this case, A star on the base cards that you will not see on Tiffany. So this is pretty easy now to tell them apart on the back of the cards. And then we go back to the traded and traded Tiffany. And again, with the lighter backs already in the traded cards, could be mistaken for a Tiffany, and it's harder to tell. And so we'll just note that the Tiffany is a little more vibrant than the traded, but I do think in person, when you're holding them, it's hard to tell. But Topps has added those 2 stars to the base cards to really differentiate which one's Tiffany. 1987 Topps Collector's Edition. This is when Tiffany is really hitting its peak. So sort of with the kind of junk wax era boom, skyrocketing interest in baseball cards at the time, you can see that even the limited edition collector sets, Topps increased their production to 30,000 of each set. Let's dig into it. This year we're looking at the Topps Tiffany Barry Bonds, which is worth $1,700 right now in a PSA 10. The Topps Tiffany Bo Jackson Future Stars, which I love the look and the design of this with the future stars at the bottom and just the kind of action shot of Bo Jackson there. As you can see, his cards are among the most valuable from 86 and even 87 Tiffany cards. And then the Greg Maddux 1986 Topps Trade Tiffany for $900 in a PSA 10. 87, you can still see the kind of gray base card stock. This is very similar to the way that Topps had always done their cards up to this point. So the Tiffany is much more vibrant, but it's really hard to tell with traded and then traded Tiffany. So we'll go and just confirm. You can see that the main difference here, besides the white cardstock, is the printed in USA. There isn't a difference anymore in terms of the letter and the star before copyright. They both have an E star in front of the copyright. So now we're really relying on this printed in USA versus the Tiffany not having that because they're made in Ireland. And then that vibrant white pop to the cards. And then when we go and look at the traded cards, the traded and traded Tiffany, they're harder to tell. And so there's 2 stars on the base cards where there's no stars on the traded Tiffany is really the main way to tell a difference in this year. 1988, things are rocking. The baseball card industry is booming. Topps is making another 30,000 of the limited Topps Collector's Edition sets. This year they're in this kind of forest green box. And the cards to kind of look for in this one are the Topps Trade Roberto Alomar Tiffany for $400 in a PSA 10. The Tom Glavine 88 Topps Tiffany for $1,750. And then I love this Topps Tiffany Dwight Gooden, Doc Gooden PSA 10, only $100 for 1988. And if you really pay attention to the kind of white border design of the 88 cards, I think you can really tell a difference on the back of the cards that Topps has improved the base cardstock in this set. And so it has a inherently brighter color to it than the base cards did previously, which makes Tiffany a little bit harder to tell, but you'll see that it's really interesting. Instead of Tiffany getting white cardstock vibrant, it gets a little more pumpkin orange in this case. And the printing quality is still amazing in this one. And that makes traded and traded Tiffany by the back color, again, hard to tell. So the key piece to look for between base and Tiffany in 1988 is, again, the printed in USA, which will not be on the Tiffany cards. And just note that now, instead of Tiffany being just white and lighter, it's this richer, darker color, which looks really, really good in person. The traded Tiffany and the base traded cards are harder, but again, Topps has kept the double star on the base traded cards. That does not appear on the traded Tiffany, as we've highlighted here in the boxes, and so that's the main way to tell a difference. 1989 Topps Collector's Edition, you'll see that the production cut in half, and Topps only made 15,000 of each. I think this is sort of a response to limited interest from the junk wax era. There's too much of everything and too many versions coming out in this time. 89 also coincides with the launch of Upper Deck, which we'll talk about. And so there's only 15,000 sets for each of the Tiffany complete sets and the Tiffany traded complete sets. This year we're looking at the 1989 Topps Tiffany Randy Johnson in a PSA 10s worth $4,000. The 1989 Topps traded Ken Griffey Jr., which is a great looking card, pretty iconic and one of the most graded cards of all time in base. The Tiffany will fetch $3,000 in a PSA 10, and I just love this Topps trade Deion Sanders Tiffany card. It's only $250 in a PSA 10, and Deion was a great two-way player, similar to Bo Jackson at the time. We're back to a little bit more of the darker base here, where the Tiffany really pops in the color and vibrancy, and where the Topps traded is trickier. You can see that richer color of the Topps trade Tiffany, but this is where things get really interesting in 1989, because from what's printed on the design, there is no difference to tell base versus Tiffany besides this premium cardstock and the lighter, brighter colors. The printed in USA is no longer included on the base cards, and so Tiffany doesn't have it either. They both have a letter and a star before the copyright, so there's no differences. If you had them in person, the color and then the thickness of the card is really the only thing that's going to guide you between the differences between the 1989 base and Tiffany. And then looking at the traded in Tiffany, it's the same story here. I don't know why they did this, but you'll see they put the 2 stars on the traded and the traded Tiffany cards, which to me makes no sense. It was the only way in design that they were differentiating them. Because the traded cards are lighter and brighter in general, it is harder to tell than traded Tiffany. I understand that there are some card shops that have been caught trying to sell base traded cards as Tiffany cards because people may not be able to tell the differences themselves. So if you're buying in this era, especially in 89, you want to make sure that you have a third-party authentication like PSA, looking at the thickness of the cards and the gloss to ensure that you're paying the premium for the Tiffany cards. Interestingly enough, in 1989, Topps, who owned Bowman, brought Bowman baseball cards back, and they did so at a great time because of the Bowman Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card is pretty iconic. But they also brought the 1989 Bowman Collector's Edition, which became known as Bowman Tiffany. Now, Bowman didn't have a traded set, so we were only looking at the base set here in Tiffany version. And again, these were sold as complete sets. So any Bowman Tiffany card that you find today has been pulled out of a set that is no longer complete. So the cards here to look for would be the 89 Bowman Tiffany Ken Griffey Father-Son card, which is a cool card. PSA 10 is worth $375. The 1999 Bowman Tiffany Ken Griffey Jr. card is worth $15,000 in PSA 10. That is a very iconic card. I love the Bowman card. The Bowman Tiffany is only that much more rare. And then you can look at the 89 Bowman Tiffany Edgar Martinez card for a PSA 10 of about $300. Again, just like 89 Topps cards, the 89 Bowman cards did not have a design difference between base and Tiffany. And so the only way you can tell is by the Tiffany having the brighter, more premium cardstock. But the cardstock has improved over this time, and so even the base is actually pretty good and pretty close. These would be really hard to tell if you didn't have them in your hands and really could look for the gloss and the thickness of the card on the front. 1990 Topps Collector's Edition. You can see where the trend is heading. We started at 7,000 sets, ballooned up to 30,000, and now we're all the way back down to 5,000 sets, only 5,000 produced. The other thing to notice about this year is they actually made a much more premium cardboard box. It's thicker, It has a lid now, and it's a much nicer box. I'm not sure why they waited this long to do that, but let's get into the 1990 Topps Tiffany cards. So the cards we're looking for here is the 1990 Topps Tiffany Ken Griffey Jr. card. This is a great card. I actually, in general, didn't like the multicolored design of the 1990 Topps cards, but I think it really works with the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card with the Mariners and then the little Topps Rookie of the Year emblem there. So a PSA 10 is worth $2,300 here. Looking at the 1990 Topps Tiffany Sammy Sosa, PSA 10 is worth $250, and then 1990 Topps Tiffany Larry Walker is worth $300 in a PSA 10. Going back to the back of the cards again, the color is going to be more difficult to tell them apart. Fortunately, in 1990, Topps brought back a differentiation here in that there's a letter and a star before the copyright on the base cards that does not appear in Tiffany. So there is a design printed difference on the back of the 1990 cards finally again. But when you look at the traded and traded Tiffany, there is no difference. They both have the double star on the back before the copyright symbol. Neither of them say printed in the USA. There's no way to tell. And actually the color on the backs, they're so close because of the way the traded is printed. Unless you have them in your hand, it's going to be very hard to tell them apart. 1990, Bowman returned with their Tiffany set. They only produced 6,000 sets again, but this will be the last Bowman Tiffany set that they released at this time. And so we're looking at the Bowman Tiffany Bo Jackson. PSA 10 is worth $350. The 1990 Bowman Tiffany Sammy Sosa for $100, and the 1990 Bowman Tiffany Frank Thomas for $100 in PSA 10. Consistent with how Bowman did it before, there was no difference in design on the back to tell them apart, other than the premium cardstock, the brighter color, and then the thickness of the gloss. So we're going to talk about why they stopped making Bowman Tiffany, but I think it's related to why they also stopped making Topps Tiffany the very next year. So let's do that. You can see 1991, this would be the last year of the Topps Tiffany cards. We're all the way down to 4,000 serial numbered sets by the year. They did shrink wrap them in a cellophane, which is really nice. They have that premium box, but you can see kind of the writings on the wall from Tiffany. The interest took some time to build up. It peaked in kind of the peak junk wax era, and now it declined all the way down to 4,000 each. So in the last year of the Topps Tiffany cards, we got the Topps Tiffany Chipper Jones, $3,000 in a PSA 10. 1991 Topps Tiffany Larry Walker for $300 in a PSA 10. And the 1990 Topps Trade Jeff Bagwell Tiffany for $1,000 in PSA 10. Looking at the back of the cards from base Tiffany, traded and traded Tiffany, there's a little bit of brightness and color difference still in these designs, but because the end is coming for Topps Tiffany, I don't think they cared as much. They still don't have a way to differentiate base and Tiffany in this 1991 version, and the same is true for traded and traded Tiffany. So really you're going to be relying on that gloss and the brightness and vividness of the cardstock. But why did they stop? Well, I think one of the key things that made Topps Tiffany come to an end is that a lot of the things that were premium about Topps Tiffany, Upper Deck actually launched in 1989. So we've done a whole video, if you haven't had a chance to watch Upper Deck, the history of Upper Deck cards and how they really changed the baseball card industry quickly with their launch of their cards. They have a white premium cardstock with a really nice gloss finish to it. They had sharp photos, holograms, and things that just were even more premium than Topps Tiffany, and it was in their base offering. So clearly Topps had to pivot again and innovate. And so instead of just having this limited release, Topps had to look to really up their game in the quality of their base cards. And they sort of did this. I wish they did it with the actual Topps cards, and the quality did improve, but not like a leap. They took all of their effort for producing a premium line of the cards and put it in 1991 into the Topps Stadium Club. Now, don't get me wrong, the quality of these photos in printing, the fact that they have a little bit of gold foil in the Stadium Club logo on the cards, these are premium cards, and they reference here the Kodak quality of images and so forth. Now, to me, what I didn't like about these is sort of the artistic photos. I wish it was more game action photos. These were a little bit not my taste, but they did not include bubblegum in these, and they were premium, and this is really sort of what Topps took to compete with Upper Deck, but they made a separate line instead of making Topps cards. I think this was a business mistake because they really reaffirmed that Topps cards are inferior to Upper Deck, and it takes a Topps Stadium card to bring the quality up to what Upper Deck is doing, and I just think that was a mistake at the time. So Topps Tiffany never came back, but it is interesting in the year 2000, Topps brought back, when instead of calling the collector's edition, they called it the limited edition sets, and they are print run limited, so only 4,000 of these. And then I think as a cool nod to Topps Tiffany, they actually came in a Tiffany blue box. So I feel like this is awesome. These came in complete sets again. There's only 619 cards in the set instead of maybe what you would expect, like a 620 card set. And that's because Topps is intentionally leaving out card number 7 as a way to pay tribute to Mickey Mantle. So this kind of Tiffany teal box was a limited edition offering that was very premium. I really love the look of these. You can see that they did this in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, and then it went away for over 10 years. They did bring it back for 4 years in a print run of 999, and then at a special VIP event at Topps headquarters, they did make 100 of these for the guests 2021. So that is our history of how Topps Tiffany cards came to be. Be sure to check the description for links to our most popular videos, and then stay tuned for other great content coming soon. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't done so already.